welcome back, welcome back. Please take your seats as soon as you can, fill up, no gaps, get close. You're gonna wanna be close for what's about to happen. I'm so excited for you. I'm trying to stay calm, but we've got an amazing group of people coming out to take us right through into the end of the day. It's just gonna be exquisite. So welcome back from your Hive sessions. I hope that they were interesting and stimulating, that you learned lots and you met people, and that you're talking amongst yourselves, and got some new ideas. So we are now moving into the last part of the day. We're going to be hearing from lifelong activists about their journeys towards sustainable practices and their brands, and about the power of creativity to help us come together in collective action and to navigate our way through times of climate anxiety. There's no shortage of challenges in 2025, and therefore it is a great pleasure and privilege to invite onto the stage to talk about this moment and his work. Please join me in welcoming Lord Foster.
Good afternoon. The title of the event is Design for the Planet, and it was suggested to me that as I've been practicing for more than 60 years, that perhaps the title of what I have to say should be Lessons from a Life in Design. As I see it, there's a convergence between those two titles, because as an architect and urbanist, I've been fascinated by the issues of cities, public space, and planning. So I'd really like to talk about the importance of that and the way in which that is the key to, amongst other issues, climate change, and illustrate it with some examples from the work in practice, Foster & Partners, and also the work of the foundation, the Norman Foster Foundation, and its institute, which is about urbanity. So really, starting with cities, 58% of the world's population lives in cities, and by another 25 years, that will be 70%. Cities, as we know, generate wealth. I mean, for example, the GDP of a city like New York is equivalent to the GDP of a nation, Canada. So if that's good news, what's the downside? And the downside is that cities produce 70% of airborne pollution, of greenhouse gases. And that is all going to be compounded by the additional 2.5 billion who, by that same time, will almost certainly be occupying cities or urbanities. So what does that mean in terms of the built world? If we're here in London, then that is the equivalent to absorb that population increase, which will most certainly be dominated by cities, is the creation of 11 Londons every year for the next 25 years. So if those are new cities or the extensions of present cities, what kind of cities should we encourage or discourage? What kind? Well, if we're really simplistic about cities and urbanities, there are arguably 3 kinds of cities. And London, where we are, is pretty typical of the compact, walkable, traditional city. High density, relatively low rise. Another version of that, this is probably around 5,000 people to the square kilometre. You can leap up to something like 27,000. It's the same kind of walkable city. It's a mixture of uses, quite close proximity, has good public transport. There's a polar opposite, which is relatively recent, and that is the sprawling, suburban, car-borne city. If simplistically there are those two kinds, then there's the hybrid, which starts as the one on the left and expands and sprawls as a car-borne city into suburbs. So if future urbanizations, starting today, which one should we encourage? I tell you, we encourage the walkable, compact, high-density city. We discourage sprawl and roads into the countryside, eating nature and biodiversity. Why? Well, carbon footprint, start with that. The compact city has half the carbon footprint of the car-borne city. This is a map of the east coast of America, and high carbon is red. Orange, still high, but a little less. Yellow, a little less. And the lowest is dark green. And on this map, that is New York. Counterintuitive, because everybody would say, oh, well, steel and glass towers, it's got to be energy consuming. Quite the reverse. It's the lowest carbon footprint. But if we say, well, we don't give a damn about the planet, where do people want to go? Where does the market dictate? If you look at all the surveys of the top 10 cities where people want to visit as tourists or live and bring up a family, absolutely consistently, it's always the walkable city, even here on 3 continents. If we take another view and say, well, we don't care too much about market forces, we don't really worry about the planet, we're really concerned about our health. The healthiest city is the walkable city. There's this recent so-called Paris 15-minute city, where everything that you need, whether you shop, go to school, ideally go to work, or if you don't go to work, then you go to access to very good public transport that will get you there. All the things that you need as a family, as a community, neighborhoods within 15 minutes. It's very nice. It's not actually a Parisian invention. The reality is that here in London, 90%, more than 90% of Londoners are within a 10-minute walking distance of a high street, which contains most of these ingredients. So we come, bigger picture, to the city. What is a city? It's a collection of these individual buildings which we see here on a street, or a tall building, the so-called Gherkin. But it's more than a collection of buildings. It's the infrastructure, the urban glue that binds together all these different buildings, which makes the DNA of a city. It is that which makes the difference between London and Paris, Paris and New York, Copenhagen, you can go on. Everyone has its own difference. What determines those differences? It is the network of connectivity. It's the streets, the boulevards, it's the bridges here across the river, it's connectivity, it's the public spaces, it's the green spaces, it's the terminals, the public transport, the systems below ground. You can describe that as a map. And if it's London, then, and it's the city of London, then it has medieval roots. Those are desire lines. They don't follow a man-made imposition of a grid. If you said, okay, this is London, this is the city of London, but if you took another part of London, or you took Paris or New York, then it would be a grid, and the grid would be different. And that would determine, in many ways, the prosperity, the friendliness, the beauty or otherwise, and to a large part, influence the carbon footprint. If we talk about connectivity and the dynamic in the way in which cities change because they evolve over time. So if I look at one intervention, and interestingly, I was asked, what do you think are the most important things that you and your colleagues have been involved with here in London? I was recently asked by a journalist, and the journalist expected me as an architect to come up with some buildings, and I said, they're not buildings, I would choose 2 projects. So I selected those 2 projects to share this afternoon. And this is a very familiar Albert Bridge, a suspension bridge. So 230 years later, for a competition for a pedestrian bridge, working with Arabs, the engineers, we evolved a completely new kind of suspension bridge. Unlike the traditional one, it doesn't go up in the air. It's absolutely kind of low for all kinds of reasons. One, in terms of its deference to St. Paul's on its axis. The other axis is Tate Modern. And if we look at some of the quantification, the effect of that bridge, there have been 8 million crossings. That was twice the estimate. So extraordinarily popular in terms of its connectivity and pedestrianisation. Great increase in visitors to St. Paul's, 100% increase for St. Paul's and significantly for the Tate. Southwark population, instead of shrinking, is growing. 3,000 new jobs were created, 60 new hotels, though not even a hotel before this bridge. And a good news, bad news, because affordability in terms of inner cities, but property values being raised. The other project that I'd like to talk about is Trafalgar Square, but first perhaps just a few words about its roots. Quite some years ago, with my wife and young children, we were walking past a Horse Guards parade, and I was appalled by the proliferation of parked cars, totally disfiguring what seemed like a noble ceremonial space, a setting for historic buildings, totally destroyed by parked cars. And I did a sketch showing what it would be like if you took those cars out. And that, as a cause, was picked up by the Evening Standard. And the result of that was a competition for the centre of London called World Squares. It was concerned with Whitehall, Parliament Square, Trafalgar Square, and only one part of that built. But just returning back to Horse Guards, the result of the public outcry as a result of the Evening Standard article meant that those cars were taken away. And it's very, very interesting to make that comparison of the before and after. But as I was saying, this did lead to Trafalgar Square. And if we think about Trafalgar Square as it was back in the 1990s, and most people have forgotten this, it was a roundabout, not just a roundabout for traffic, but a roundabout for people. And literally, as you can see in that image there, one of our team, the team working on the project, is dodging the traffic in between the bus and the car. But literally penned in by steel railings. So it's dangerous and very, very unpleasant. The centre of the square was essentially reserved for pigeons and 1 or 2 people who might sit around the edge feeding the pigeons. So if we look at what effectively we did, and simplistically, we closed the northern part and pedestrianised it. A lot of other things that we did, quite subtle. We opened up the square to, there's a level change, very, very gradual. So we took down what was a barrier, introduced a number of quite subtle facilities. This is how it was before, long lost in most people's memories. And of course, this is how it is now. And the centre, a few souvenir stores, and as I was saying, lots of pigeons, And now it's become really a kind of living room for London, for all kinds of events. And afterwards, just analysing that, a dramatic increase in terms of pedestrian movement, half the walking time, congestion reduced by 30%. I have to say it did also occur at the point of the congestion charging. So the combination of that and the increased pedestrianisation, as I say, the city is always in flux, and you can make changes to improve the quality of life and at the same time improve the health by reducing pollution, as we can see here. And that combination of congestion charges also boosted the budget for public transport. And Tim Stoner, who's an organizer here of this event, and in his day job is Space Syntax, which is the systematic evaluation of connectivity, pedestrian movement, and this is Space Syntax's map of the whole of London. So really, just to give an insight into the process, it seems very, very simple. All you do is close a road. But that process involved 160 observation points, 27,000 drivers were questioned, 306 locations, pedestrians, 10,000 people polled, a public exhibition, 1,500 questionnaires, and 180 organizations consulted. In other words, interest groups consulted. Now, you could say that's a great jump from this image here, which is the formal city, and Trafalgar Square, of course, is a part of this formal city. But many formal cities, as we know around the world, have informal settlements. Whether you call those informal settlements, whether you call them slums, whatever, the reality is that it's 14% of humanity. It's more than 1 billion people who do not have access to clean water, to modern sanitation, or the ability to throw a switch to get electricity for heating or cooking. And at a Humanitas lecture in Oxford some years back, I just voiced a proposition that the plight of this 14% of humanity was not really being addressed by the design professions. And perhaps these communities were alive and well as communities, and instead of bulldozing them, you could regenerate them from within. And I shared those thoughts with somebody that I knew at that time, Ratan Tata, sadly no longer with us, and he listened very, very patiently, and some years later he called me and said, I've thought about that idea, I've shared it with somebody who I'm very close to, who's a governor in India, and he is giving land rights to settlers in informal settlements, and he likes your idea and would like you to have a pilot project and try that idea out. So here we are in Odisha, and with the governor and Ratan Tata in the top left there, handing out land certificates at the main event to settlers, and embarking on a project for a community called Nolia Sahi. And just to give you a feel, because the point that I'm making is that planning is a bottom-up process, and we can use devices, whether that is space syntax, whether it is digitization, and there is a process of involving a community. And the principles that I'm describing in terms of a European example are common also in this settlement here. So if that arrow is indicating a route, then to give you a feel of that community, this is how that would look there. So we went with a team on site, living in the area over a period of just over a year. The project was terminated by COVID. But the interest groups were the fishermen and the business group, and they were concerned with the main route, which was parallel to the beach. If I go back to that map, I should perhaps point out that the water, the swamp at the top, which subsequently, as part of the project, would be drained, that was the bathroom for the females in the community. The fishermen and the beach was the work area, but a part of that beach was designated as the bathroom for the males in the community. And obviously, one of the objectives was to make a transfer to modern sanitation. But interestingly, that was not the highest on the list. When we sent out questionnaires and asked for order of preference, consistently, every questionnaire, the first need that everybody had was a roof that did not leak, and then the list went on. So it was a process of using, again, the same techniques as for Trafalgar Square. And coming back to the interest groups, the businessmen, the fishermen, and then the group that was concerned with the diagonal route, the males in the, which is much more commercial. It's where the equivalent of the shops would be as opposed to the business of the front, related much more to the fishermen. And then with the women in the community. So if you can see that horizontal route, the businessmen, the fishermen, the males, the other businessmen, the diagonal route, the commercial route, and then those fingers. And extraordinarily, the women in the community, this was about security, access, and connectivity. And that process, we used models, we involved school children, there were exhibitions, all in microcosm, the same as the earlier project that I described, and then the equivalent of the town hall meeting. And here in this image, this tells a very, very powerful story, because the most influential individuals in that community who were here and really driving this project were the women in the community. And the achievements later, under construction at the time, was modern sanitation. And in terms of a total approach to the household, the house tending of the community, the establishment of a new industry, which was recycling waste, and of course the pedestrian routes, paving those, adding drainage. So if that was a project little over a year, and I'm talking about the effects of planning, what if I go back in Europe to a city called Duisburg? And I'm looking here now over a period of nearly 40 years. And 40 years ago, this was Rust Belt city. This is the fringe, this is the inner harbor. Interestingly, the inner harbor is the largest waterway, inner waterway in the world. It's also the touching point for the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative when it comes into Europe. 40 years back, this was the master plan, and that master plan has evolved over time. Our first project here was in 1988, and it was called a Business Promotion Center. So it was about promoting new industries, clean industries. And some years later, here we see the startups, the new clean industry, electronics, bicycle lanes, landscaping. We created an infrastructure of waterways. Here you can see it under construction. That is what it's like now. That is the setting for high-quality, rental, affordable homes. And here you can see the quality of those homes with their outdoor terraces. And over that 40-year period, the trees that have matured, we have great avenues of trees. And that first image that you saw of those decaying buildings are now a completely new life. So if I go back 40 years, let me go back to the very beginning of practice. And this is an image of a project in the just off the coast of Africa. It's an island called Gomera, and if you can read the fine print, it's about harvesting energy, it's about recycling waste to fertilizer. At that time, the word green architecture and sustainability had not been invented. I'm going back to the 1960s, early 1970s. But those principles from that time have permeated every project, including this project, which is virtually a manifesto for clean energy. It's the Reichstag, it's reincarnation, it's reinvention as a parliament for a unified Germany, and it is using many of those issues, those technologies in terms of harvesting energy, geothermal, solar, and that as a symbol of democracy has become the public space that is associated with the political body symbolically. The public is looking down on the politicians who are answerable to them, and this dome, this device, is generated by the public. It's also public space, and it's very much about what is ecologically driving this building, funneling natural light down, and annually some 3 million visitors, the most visited parliament in the world. If we're talking about 3 million, it's interesting in terms of mobility and people on the move. And the staggering figure for the people who, the last statistic was 2024, moving through air terminals, is annually 9.5 billion people every year. So anything that you could do to humanize that experience and at the same time reduce a carbon footprint simultaneously would be good news. And Stansted Airport, British Airports Authority, at that time headed up by an engineer, gave us the task of essentially reinventing the terminal. If this was the terminal of that time, with heavy equipment above a roof, no natural light, turn that upside down, Stansted, let the light in, service it from below, which you can do easily because it's a everyday, a year use, and the change is transformational in terms of experience, quality of experience, and obviously in terms of energy. We have gone on to do, if that was a revolution, then evolution. We continue to develop those ideas, and those ideas, of course, have been adopted by planners and designers worldwide. The very latest airport is no longer a terminal, and here we're talking really large numbers. We're talking projected 2030, something like 185 million passengers a year. Just to put that in context, Heathrow at the moment is around 83 million. So it's a quantum leap. And here, because the airport as we know it now accretes a number of other kinds of buildings organically around it. So the proposition here is you start with that reality. You don't let it grow organically. You create a master plan, and the airport becomes a mini-city. And here it is essentially modeled on the walled ancient medieval city. And if we look at what is at the heart of that, it's really an oasis, a green spine that weaves its way through that new city. If we think about the medieval city, one of those cities largely intact in the south of France is Nîmes. And in the heart of Nîmes, the old quarter, a kind of combination of medieval and Roman planning, so a mixture of the grid, is the intervention which is a result of a competition for something called a mediathèque, called the Carré d'Art, which is opposite an exquisite surviving Roman temple. And when we came to that competition, then the setting was really, although noble temple, was pretty awful. There's a vacant site opposite a road thronged with traffic, and the area around the Roman temple was enclosed by a fence. And there's a tree. You can see that tree there on the right. And the transformational effect of that building, and you can see the same tree on the right there. And this building has galvanized, had a ripple effect. So it has brought a new prosperity, it's brought a new visitor, not only a facility for the citizens of the city, but also international attraction. And within it, it has obviously galleries, spaces for the performing arts, but it's also been transformational in terms of its effect in the area of pedestrianisation, as I was saying, but a new level of prosperity. So how do we get, if professionally, we're not able to do it professionally, but through a foundation, we can accumulate those experiences. We can bring together a network of world experts, and a branch of that foundation, the Institute concerned with sustainability in cities, has recently, it's had a whole series of workshops over the last 8 or 10 years. But its offshoot, the Institute, seeks in a course to combine academia and work, as opposed to the traditional university course, which is really academia and then there's a break and work. So what if you fuse those two together? If you had pilot cities that would work, if the students, graduates, could immerse themselves in the real life issues. All of this in cooperation with the Autonomous University of Madrid, which gives it its master's degree rating, also combination with the skills of MIT, so extraordinary network. And interestingly, using the most up-to-date technology digitally to be able to predict design changes. So what if you close this street? What if you pedestrianize here? What if you reduce the amount of traffic there? What is the knock-on effect in terms of air quality? What if you plant trees here? So a tool to be able to show in anticipation the effect of design changes. Eventually a tool that could be harnessed by the community, so the community could share, could understand the basis of decisions. And, interactive, as you can see in this model here. So that as a course, also combined with, in Madrid, its base, public lectures. So not only within the institute itself, but going outreach to the city of which it's a part, and bringing together not only students, but also the network of world experts and mentors. To sum it up, really, are decisions made on the data? Are they made on the facts? Do they involve those whose lives will be affected and who have a view on the quality, on what they need in their community? Or will those decisions be based on fashion? Will they be based on prejudice? Will it be a top-down imposition? Will it be being aware of the facts behind some of the propositions that I've shown, the advantages, for example, of the compact city as opposed to the car-borne sprawl? So that, in summary, produces a graduate class, and this class graduating, they've had the experience of working with 3 cities. They now move on. Already in the alumni, we have a mayor in Chile who's organized a consortium of mayors on a conservation project nationally. We have individuals who now in town halls, C40 group, going out there and spreading the message. The civic leaders of the future, the investment of younger generations in the future of the planet, of cities, an optimistic view of design and the power of design. Thank you. Thank you. I think I'm expected to leave the way that I came in to make way for the next speaker. So thank you.